In the dead hours of a Saturday morning in January, while Caracas slept, the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford and its strike group consummated what American strategists had been rehearsing for months. Donald Trump's announcement, delivered via Truth Social with the brevity of a telegram from some earlier imperial age, informed the world that the United States had conducted what he termed a large-scale strike against Venezuela, and that President Nicolas Maduro and his wife had been captured and flown out of the country. One might pause to admire the audacity, 74 words to announce what amounts to the abduction of a sitting head of state, the bombardment of a sovereign capital, and the casual demolition of international norms that took 80 years to construct. The justification offered for this adventure deserves examination, if only for its breathtaking dishonesty. We are told that Maduro presides over a narco-terrorist state, that boats laden with poison set sail from Venezuelan shores to murder Americans, and that the strikes on more than 35 vessels since September, killing at least 115 people, represent a noble crusade against the plague of drugs. Trump has claimed, with the statistical precision that characterizes his pronouncements, that each destroyed boat saves 25,000 American lives. By this arithmetic, the Caribbean campaign has already rescued more than 500,000 citizens from overdose death, a figure that exceeds the nation's actual annual toll by a factor of 5. The difficulty with this narrative is that it collapses upon contact with empirical reality. The Drug Enforcement Administration, that most anti-narcotic of institutions, has produced no assessment linking Venezuela to the fentanyl supply that actually kills Americans. The State Department's own narcotics strategy report identifies Mexico, using precursors from China, as the sole significant source of illicit fentanyl reaching American shores. Venezuela appears nowhere in the DEA's threat assessment for this synthetic plague. What Venezuela does transit is cocaine, roughly 10 to 13% of global production, most of which travels not to Miami or Houston, but to the considerably more lucrative markets of Western Europe, where a kilogram fetches twice the American price. The boats that Trump orders destroyed in the Caribbean are, by the government's own data, moving cocaine toward London and Madrid, not Los Angeles. One might charitably suppose that the administration simply conflates all drugs in its crusade, cocaine and fentanyl alike. But this theory encounters an inconvenient problem named Juan Orlando Hernandez. The former president of Honduras sat in federal prison, convicted of facilitating the passage of more than 400 tons of cocaine toward the United States, having accepted millions in bribes from the Sinaloa cartel and from Joaquin El Chapo Guzman personally. Federal prosecutors called it state-sponsored drug trafficking. The judge termed him a two-faced politician hungry for power, who had operated his country as a narco-state where violent traffickers enjoyed near-total impunity. And on the 1st of December, Donald Trump pardoned him. The juxtaposition is not merely ironic, it is obscene. At the very moment Trump was bombing drug boats and threatening invasion, he liberated a man whose trafficking volume dwarfs anything Venezuela has been accused of facilitating. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, no liberal critic, expressed the obvious. I hate it. It's a horrible message. It's confusing to say on the one hand we should potentially even consider invading Venezuela for drug trafficking, and on the other hand, let somebody go. Tim Kaine was blunter. The pardon proves that Trump cares nothing about narco-trafficking. The Hernandez pardon reveals the war on drugs as what it has always been in Trump's hands, a pretext for geopolitical mischief dressed in the costume of public health. The administration's own officials have been surprisingly candid about this. When asked by a radio host whether the Venezuela campaign concerned oil, Trump replied, "Well, it's about a lot of things. It's about that." White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles informed Vanity Fair that Trump wants to keep on blowing boats up until Maduro cries "Uncle." The humanitarian veneer peels away to expose the imperial skull beneath. The comparison to Operation Just Cause, the 1989 invasion of Panama that extracted Manuel Noriega for American prosecution, has become irresistible to administration officials. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his deputies have explicitly invoked the precedent. But the analogy reveals more than they intend. Panama was a nation of 2.5 million people. Venezuela has nearly 30 million. Panama occupied 75,000 square kilometers. Venezuela sprawls across more than 900,000, twice the size of Iraq. The United States maintained 14,000 troops on Panamanian soil and controlled the Canal Zone. It possesses no such foothold in Venezuela. Noriega commanded a fragmented force of 16,000 poorly equipped soldiers. Maduro presides over armed forces integrated with neighborhood militias and backed by Russian military advisors and Iranian diplomatic cover. The Panama operation, for all its advantages, still killed between 300 and 500 Panamanian civilians. What a Venezuela campaign might cost in blood does not bear contemplation. The legal architecture for this assault is as flimsy as its strategic foundations. The administration refuses to publicize the Justice Department memorandum supposedly authorizing military strikes against drug boats, leaving Congress and the public in darkness about the constitutional reasoning. International law scholars have been unsparing. Mark Weller of Chatham House calls the operation a clear violation of the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force. William Burke White of the University of Pennsylvania describes the strikes as failing to satisfy even the most fundamental obligations of the law of armed conflict. The UN Special Rapporteurs have explicitly stated that there is no international armed conflict with Venezuela and therefore no legal basis for treating alleged smugglers as military targets. David Crane, the founding chief prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, accuses the United States of aggression that flies in the face of 80 years of rules-based international order. What emerges from the smoke over Caracas is not the liberation of an oppressed people, but the reassertion of a doctrine Americans once claimed to have abandoned: the right of the strong to seize what they want from the weak, dressed in whatever costume of righteousness proves convenient. Maduro is indeed a corrupt authoritarian who stole an election and brutalized his population. Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize last October for her peaceful resistance to his regime, represents everything he is not: democratic legitimacy, civilian courage, the patient work of building opposition across political divides. But Machado won that prize precisely because she championed ballots over bullets. Her movement collected systematic documentation of electoral fraud and demanded that the world recognize democratic results. She has now seen her cause hijacked by an administration that cannot distinguish between liberation and conquest. The boats destroyed in the Caribbean carried not cartel kingpins, but what former drug policy director Rahul Gupta described as young men between 15 and 24 years old, impressionable and desperate, recruited for runs paying between $100 and $1,000. They are expendable to the cartels and, it appears, to the American military. The administration has published no evidence of what any particular boat carried, identified no traffickers by name, established no chain of custody for alleged contraband. When one strike in September left survivors clinging to wreckage, a follow-up attack killed them, prompting Democratic lawmakers to call for war crimes investigations, and even Rand Paul to denounce the glorification of killing without trial. The capture of Maduro, if confirmed, will doubtless produce a trial in some American courtroom, with prosecutors reading out indictments prepared during Trump's first term. The Kerr-Frisbee doctrine permits American courts to exercise jurisdiction over defendants brought before them regardless of how they arrived, a legal nicety that ought to trouble anyone who believes the rule of law means something beyond the convenience of the powerful. Noriega was tried under this doctrine too, and spent 17 years in American custody before further imprisonment in France and finally Panama, where he died behind bars. If this is the model, Maduro may grow old waiting for justice while his country burns. But the larger damage cannot be contained in any courtroom. When the United States conducts regime change by abduction, when it bombs sovereign territory on pretextual grounds, when it pardons friends while prosecuting enemies for identical crimes, it announces to every authoritarian on earth that the post-war order is dead and force is the only arbiter that matters. Vladimir Putin, now engaged in his own war of choice against Ukraine, will note with interest that his American counterpart has adopted the very playbook Washington once condemned: military intervention dressed as counter-terrorism, sovereignty dismissed as inconvenient, international law relegated to rhetoric for the naive. What answer can American diplomats now give when Moscow claims to be fighting terrorists in Kyiv? The administration offers no coherent strategy, no exit plan, no vision for Venezuela beyond the removal of one man. Senator Mike Lee of Utah, told by Marco Rubio that Maduro would stand trial, repeated the secretary's assurance that no further action in Venezuela was anticipated now that the target was in custody. This is the language of a police operation, not a military campaign. It presumes that a country of 30 million people, now leaderless, bombed and invaded, will simply accept whatever arrangements Washington prefers. History suggests otherwise. There is a term for what happened over Caracas in the early hours of Saturday morning, and it is not justice or liberation or counter-narcotics. It is aggression, the supreme international crime, distinguished from others in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. The United States has committed such acts before and will likely commit them again. But rarely has an administration announced its intentions so openly, pursued them so recklessly, or justified them with such transparent mendacity. Donald Trump promised to end wars. He has started one, and the only question now is how many will die before it ends.